What if I told you France once built a car with a one-cylinder engine, a plywood body and only one door, and it still made it to market? Ladies and gentlemen, and my friend Timmy, have you ever wondered what would happen if someone tried to build a car using the leftovers from a broken wardrobe, a bicycle, and a dream that barely made it past the napkin sketch phase? Welcome to the miraculous misadventure of the 1953 Ardex, the French microcar that looked like it was built during lunch break in a high school woodshop. But first, massive thanks to our channel sponsors. Without you, this video would be of my neighbor Bob's homemade bunker and his conspiracy theory that the moon is just a giant headlight installed by Elon Musk. And trust me, nobody wants that. So France, post-World War II, a time of rebuilding, rationing, and learning how to make wine taste like hope. The country was broke. Metal was scarce, and car makers were forced to think not outside the box, but how to build the box itself from plywood, bicycle wheels, and a bit of stubborn optimism. In this frugal world stepped Marcel Tamine, a man who said, "You know what the world needs right now? A plywood shoebox with an engine strapped to it." And thus, Ardex was reborn. Founded back in 1934, Ardex started with cycle cars, tiny three-wheelers styled after Morgans, and then pivoted to building what I can only describe as cars for people who couldn't afford actual cars. By 1953, Marcel and his team unveiled a microcar that redefined minimalism. And I don't mean in the modern, clean aesthetic Instagram way. I mean that we ran out of screws and just used glue kind of minimalism. The 1953 Ardex had one mission: to move a human from point A to B for less money than a decent bicycle. If IKEA made cars, this would have been their prototype. Now let's dive into the engineering, and I use that term as generously as my aunt uses butter. The base model came with a single-cylinder, two-stroke, air-cooled engine mounted just above the rear axle. Rear-wheel drive, naturally. The entry-level version had a 50 cubic centimeters Fickle & Sachs engine pushing out around 2.5 horsepower. That's right, 2.5 horses. If you sneezed too hard inside the cabin, the car would gain 10% acceleration. There was also an extended luxury version, well, let's not lie, a 4-seater version with a Bribon SABB engine of 100 to 125 cubic centimeters, mustering 4 to 5 horsepower. It was like adding sprinkles to a slice of plain white bread and calling it cake. Now the transmission? Some models had a single-speed setup, others boasted a 3-speed manual, but all versions shared one delightful quirk: a hand-operated clutch lever on the dashboard. Because who needs pedals when you can shift like you're winding up a toy? The drivetrain used a basic chain drive to power the single rear wheel. Yes, a chain, like your old bike. Suspension? The front had a couple of forked struts, basically repurposed bicycle bits. The rear axle was mounted without independent suspension, so if you hit a bump, you didn't just feel it in your back, you felt it in your childhood memories. The wheels were actual bicycle wheels with low-pressure tires. Great for smooth village roads, tragic for cobblestones, suicidal for Paris. Brakes? Well, allegedly. Some kind of mechanical brake on the rear wheels, probably just enough to make it street legal in a small town with no police. You didn't stop this car, you gently suggested it slow down, and if the wind agreed, maybe it would. The body was made of thin plywood covered in vinyl, which sounds like a recipe for kindling, but was actually quite clever. It kept the weight down to just 95 to 100 kilograms, 209 to 220 pounds. That's barely more than Timmy after he's had a bad week and lost his beer weight. Dimensions? A whole 7 feet 5 inches, 2.26 meters. Long? About 3 feet 7 inches, 1.1 meters wide, and just under 4 feet, 1.2 meters tall. Basically, if you squinted, it looked like a bread box that wanted to be a spaceship. Top speed? Well, the base model clocked in at a whopping 30 kilometers per hour, about 20 miles per hour, which is still faster than a family group chat trying to agree on dinner. The deluxe high-performance version? Hold on to your berets, because it could rocket up to 50 kilometers per hour, 31 miles per hour. That's right, 50. At that point, you're legally required to squint and pretend it's fast. As for fuel economy, it sipped just around 3 liters per 100 kilometers, which means even modern hybrids look like gas-guzzling frat boys by comparison. The only thing more delicate in its consumption is Timmy tiptoeing into the kitchen at 2 a.m. to sneak a drink without waking his wife, or the dog, or the neighbors. Inside, it had a folding chair-like seat, a simple steering wheel, and almost no instrumentation. One owner said sitting in it felt like balancing on a camping stool while barreling toward regret. The production numbers? Tiny, extremely limited. So limited, in fact, that Ardex never showed up to any big car shows. They did private demos only on Mondays and Saturdays. Maybe they were shy, maybe they were realistic, maybe they just didn't want the press asking why their car looked like a garage sale exploded. Most of these cars are gone. One survived and was sold at auction in 2013 for $13,800. That's right, someone paid more than $13,000 for what's essentially a wheeled suitcase with identity issues. And I love it. Back in the day, the Ardex cost between 168,000 and 218,000 French francs, depending on the engine and version. That was half the price of a Renault 4CV. It was the cheapest way to avoid walking without admitting you were walking. Now, before we wrap this up, I'll say this. You've got to respect the audacity. They built a car out of plywood, powered it with a lawn trimmer, gave it one headlight, and sent it into the world with a straight face. And somehow, it worked. It was honest, it was ridiculous, and it served a purpose. Just like Timmy when he helps with yard work and accidentally trims the neighbor's cat. So yeah, the 1953 Ardex didn't change the world. It didn't win Le Mans. But it kept moving when times were tough. And that, my friends, is something to applaud. If you had fun learning about this glorified rolling lunchbox, hit that like button with the strength of a two-stroke engine and subscribe to the Cool Ideas channel. See you next time, folks. Stay weird.